Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you have no idea who I am, if you came here just by chance, my name is Julia and I make video essays and analysis about TV series, movies and pop culture. As you can tell today, it's very casual, but I really wanted to make this video because it was requested at this point. I think it's almost 2 months ago. Yes, by Ulf Lundgren. I hope I'm pronouncing this right as usual and I'm not butchering your names. And it's about Blade Runner. So today we're gonna talk about the sequel, Blade Runner 2049, and we're gonna do an analysis of it. As you can see, you actually can't see. Hold on. Yes, there you go. I'm a true fan. See, I even have my poster in my room about Blade Runner. That's Memento. That's Black Mirror, and yeah. Right, so let's start. One of the primary themes of the original Blade Runner of the 80s was the difference between the so-called replicants and humans. Replicants are no other than android or robots whose significance in sci-fi films has often been synonymous with slave. Unsurprisingly, the etymology of the word itself is derived from the Czech word meaning forced labor. Both in the original Blade Runner and in the 2017 sequel, the contrast and the relationship between humanity and artificiality is questioned and amplified. Specifically, Blade Runner 2049 expands on notions of ownership and proprietorship, especially through the villainous character of Wallace. Compared with the original movie though, 2049 introduces a new, more layered hierarchy of status, whereby newer replicant models are favored in comparison to older rebellious ones, casting a light on the model of a throwaway society. Basically the same thing that we do nowadays by getting rid of a 1-year-old smartphone, but with people, or at least androids that look like people. This is how Case device becomes a sort of barcode scanner, confirming he has secured the right product to discard. And that's why, although Blade Runner is often seen as a postmodern text, its original concept is far more aligned with the theme of production. Production of replicants, their status, and consequences of their malfunction. What happens when they decide to rebel against their programming. The sequel reminds us of this concept by still delivering sequences of labor and production, but focuses even more on the theme of reproduction, the genesis itself of replicants, as well as makes us understand production isn't enough anymore. Procreation is the critical component to ensure an army of slaves needed for the human race to colonize the stars. So the narrative focus of Blade Runner 2049 is placed on the miraculous birth of Rachel's child, which is then presented both emotionally through the story arc of father meets daughter, but also technologized through the inherent non-human features of those central to the story. It is clear then that from a religious standpoint, which Wallace often uses in his dialogue, the major theme is that of creationism. While gods have created humans, humans have created replicants, which makes someone like Wallace believed to be a sort of god, to have the power of divine creation. But if replicants are created by humans, does this mean that they still have a soul? Is their creation void of any moral code that we apply to humans? Apparently so. Wallace compares his replicant creations to angels, and just like angels, they are expected to serve their creator, are represented by obvious reproduction limitations, and at the end could rebel against their creator, as it happens in the original Blade Runner, where 4 replicants return to Earth, essentially falling like in the original biblical story of Lucifer and the fallen angels, and start rebelling. Roy has a nail in his hand, reminiscent of stigmata, and a dove in the other, all Christian symbols. But in the 2049 sequel, replicants are different. They are obedient. They have internalized their own dehumanization and fulfilled their expected role, including that of killing their own kind, without question. In a particularly horrifying scene, we see a newborn female replicant being slaughtered by Wallace because she can't give birth. Despite the fact that we can see clear that she feels fear, her emotions and thoughts running through her face that make her at the very least a living being, she is deemed as worthless, subhuman. Her faulty design doesn't make her real according to human standards. So Kay and those like him have been convinced that they're not real. The world has defined them as such, and he has learned to believe it.
Are you telling me no?
I wasn't aware that was an option, madam.
Attaboy.
But what Kay doesn't understand, and what unfortunately the movie doesn't make particularly clear, is the reason why Wallace has decided to put Kay and those like him on a subhuman level. And the reason is because there is institutional power behind it. Seen this way then, the introduction of new figures in the movie, like holograms, can be seen as tools that are used to placate replicants. Because someone like Joy represents something that is exploited by both humans and replicants alike. So ironically, a hologram like Joy is just another victimized, subservient technological tool employed in the same vicious cycle of abuse. And that's the illusion of typical consumerist societies. The corporate elite makes someone like Kay believe that he has some sort of freedom in his own life when compared to all the replicants or holograms. In reality, he's still denigrated, discriminated against, and can live the life that he wants. Villeneuve visually juxtaposes Earth's collapse with the prosperous corporate world, utilizing symbols of capitalism like Coca-Cola bottle holograms and Sony billboards occupying the city. Earth may be doomed, but business is still good. But the problem is that while the cinematography clearly points at the cost of the pursuit of profit, this view is hardly challenged in the movie narrative. We assume the dystopia through the visual cues, but the dialogue itself is quite vague in its critique of modern capitalism. The capitalistic worldview is supposed to be embodied by Jared Leto's character, and in the scene mentioned before, Wallace does briefly point at how corporate practices of exploitation have led to a misleading progress of society.
That is how I took us to 9 new worlds. 9. A child can count to 9 on fingers. We should own the stars.
But then the dialogue quickly shifts, and the central theme that also made the original Blade Runner a cult which is capitalism, is quickly forgotten, leaving space for more emotional cues. And the sequel does that a lot. It employs our shared memories of the original movie to quickly convey an emotional point. 2049 is a movie about memory, but not just those implanted to replicants, but also those implanted to us, the audience. In the brief scene between Kay and Gaff, it makes a unicorn origami that reminds us of those left at various scenes throughout the original movie. So it is a material memory, but for us, for the audience, to continue experiencing the sequel in a more meta way. And in this case, it works well, but in other scenes, not so much. At the end of the movie, while Kay/Joe is dying, the Tears in the Rain theme from the original Blade Runner starts running, as a way for the audience to associate the same type of redemption of Batty to Kay. It utilizes the depth of the original movie to drive its own emotional trajectory. One of the things that instead the sequel does really well is avoiding the typical genre's cliches. While the original focus on Deckard as a rebel noir hero, Blade Runner 2049 begins with a submissive Kay, which eventually mistakenly believes that he is special, born, not created like other replicants. And this is one of the most common tropes ever, that the figure of the chosen one, like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars or Harry Potter in the J.K. Rowling's franchise. But in 2049, discovering humanity, it is not about destiny or parentage. And this twist that the movie employed is absolutely relevant to the whole concept that made Blade Runner a cult to begin with. Because if Kay would have been Deckard's son, then the whole point that humanity is defined by our actions rather than our origins would be null. In this way, Kay may not be the special child, but in his pursuit to discover the truth, he develops agency. So by sacrificing his own individuality for the good of those around him, his character still becomes a hero, a tragic hero, but special nonetheless. In this way, the movie tricks us into making us seeing Kay as a Pinocchio figure.
You're special. A real boy now.
I'm a real boy! You're alive! And you are a real boy!
When Kay, in reality, is more akin to the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, someone who wanted the heart and ended up realizing that he had one all along. Another visual trick employed by the movie is the wooden figurine that Kay has a memory of as a child and later retrieves in the factory. The figurine has a stub on its head like a unicorn, a famously special figure that has lost its horn. Just like Kay, who wanted to be something special like a mythical unicorn and whose horn was broken once he realizes that it's just ordinary, like a typical horse. The snow itself is a metaphor for humanity, all different, no snowflake is like the other, but made of the same shared material or experiences. In the middle of the movie, when Kay starts to believe that he could be special, he notices no, because he recognizes the possibility of his own humanity. But at the end of the movie, when he notices no again, he does so with the absolute knowledge that he isn't. But after all that he has done, it doesn't matter anymore. That's the ending point that the movie tries to make. Shouldn't matter after all whether a replicant is human or non-human. And that's why it's particularly striking that in the movie that focuses so much on what it means to be human, none of the film's female characters are given any possibility to express their own humanity. Even the original Blade Runner had similar issues, and I kind of hoped that 20 years later the sequel would have solved them, but it actually managed to make it even worse. First of all, for a movie so concerned with reproduction, which is a female-only feature, the centrality of a male character is not without irony. It's even more ironic when you think that Rachel's only presence in the movie is literal bones, a literal fragmentation of her image and body. Yet she is the anomaly. She is a replicant who became a mother and had a child. Yet it's only through Deckard's eyes that we learn and feel about the miracle of life. The movie focuses its entire narrative to make Kay more human, yet it doesn't even contemplate the possible humanity of the replicant herself that gave birth. So the question of Rachel possibly having a soul is not even up to debate. She is merely a vessel. Yeah, Julia, but what about the fact that in the end we discover that it's a daughter, not a son, the so-called special child that is potentially the bringer of the revolution? That's a feminist point, isn't it? No, it isn't. Not if the whole movie is focused on Gosling's role as a hero, a tragic hero, and at the end a martyr, and Anna's role is merely symbolic. The movie made sure that she couldn't even move outside of her plastic box to get in the way of the real important stories of the men of the movie. In fact, she, similarly to Rachel, is just a vessel. She provides the memories, her memories, that eventually lead the male character throughout his whole journey. For example, even at the end of the movie when Kay tells Deckard to go and see his daughter, this is just a way to prove Kay's humanity. We're meant to feel for Kay, not for Anna. She's just a cog in a male narrative. And while Blade Runner employs a pretty negative view of the future, there are many ways of making female narratives at least three-dimensional, not to mention central, to otherwise patriarchal views of dystopian societies. Many TV shows and movies of today, especially those about science fiction, perhaps wouldn't even have existed without the influence of the original Blade Runner movie. Yet, in contrast to the sequel of this original, they're the ones that manage to deliver great stories without forgetting about their female characters, like Westworld does, for example, or The Handmaid's Tale, which is the perfect example of setting up a completely patriarchal and dystopian future while making women central to their narrative. Instead, everyone that Blade Runner 2049 considered worth of exploring is still male and still white. In the whole movie, the only female human which we encounter is Madame, whose S&M dominant undertones, the deliberate and androgynous way in which her physicality is represented, and her behavior render her largely sexless, or at the very least, very anti-feminine. Not to mention that while she does have a name, which is Lieutenant Joshi, she's almost always referred to as Madame, a title that recalls the dominatrix. Not exactly the most positive representation of the only female character in the movie in possess of some level of autonomy. Speaking of autonomy, Joy is perhaps the most controversial female character of the sequel because of her complete lack of it. She's a hologram whose programming is completely and entirely centered about making Kay happy. In fact, Joy is the acronym for jerk off instructions. So despite Kay and Joy's relationship is being sold in the movie as a love story, she is legally owned by Kay.
Joy is anything you want her to be. Joy goes anywhere you want her to go.
And despite the film tries to humanize her role to the extent that we are supposed to believe that there is some agency in what she says or does, whenever she's turned on or off, a logo reminds us that she's a product of Wallace Industries. Let's focus on the fact that the only romantic relationship that the movie portrays, it is between an owner and a property. The issues of consent and power imbalance in the Kay and Joy relationship are incredibly problematic. And instead of exploring in some ways the issues of a holographic fantasy of girlfriend/housewife, the movie shows us that a love story has blossomed through what exactly? Her sensitive subservience and domesticated care, not to mention that Joy's perhaps greatest act of personal autonomy is that of buying another female's body for Kay to have sex with. The movie puts Joy and Mariette in exact opposition. One is the good woman, the Madonna of the situation. The other is the bad woman, the whore of the situation.
I'm done with you. You can go now.
Quiet now. I've been inside you. Not so much there as you think.
And to conclude this impressive spectrum of female characters, Love, the main, adversary of Kay in a way, is still not giving any trait of her own except her need to feel loved, appreciated, and accepted by her creator. Yes, a man. I love how Brian Formo writes that in reference of love being part of the workplace, as well as industries in a way, the glass ceiling workforce was broken, but another ceiling is placed higher above. It's the ceiling of the whole goddamn universe and how men feel like they should own it. This is exemplified once again by Wallace, whose obsession for not being able to procreate his own replicants/children should highlight how male-orientated his rage is. Because what truly troubles him is his maleness incapacity to procreate, which limits his power, but not being able to control natural selection in a movie which makes it really clear about how women are systematically controlled, is impotent. And this impotence turns into a rage that makes him destroy females.
But I can only make so many. That barren pasture, empty and salted. Right here. The dead space between the stars. This is the seed that we must change forever.
Women's destruction and disposability in Blade Runner 2049 is extremely dream. But rather than being used as a horrifying insight and being recognized as a tragedy for the women themselves, becomes yet again another relevance, emotional relevance for a man's narrative.
Her eyes were green.
All in all, I feel like the sequel is very entertaining. I enjoyed it, I liked it, but there are several issues when looked at it from a more critical standpoint. So that is to say that you can still enjoy it, but once you try to critically analyze it, you realize that there is still so much that could have been done in a movie that basically takes on a huge legacy. After all, the themes of humanity, artificiality, capitalism, the stark contrast between corporate world is all already present in the original movie. So I was expecting a little bit more of insight from the sequel. There are several narratives that have just been dropped by no reason. I was expecting at a certain point a sort of revolution like it happened in the original, which obviously didn't happen. I don't know if they're gonna make a sequel of a sequel. I know that Villeneuve is quite open to it. I do hope that if they consider making a third one, they will try to be a little more careful about what they actually portray, and they try to be a little bit more insightful about what they're trying to communicate. What are your thoughts? Have you watched the sequel of Blade Runner? Have you watched the original? Watch the original. It's a great movie. Let me know what you thought of my analysis. I'm open to debate as usual. And as usual, again, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell button to be notified when my next video is going to be up. And that's it. I'll see you next time. Thanks.